They laughed at us until we became the galactic superpower. The icy wind howled across the Arctic wasteland, carrying sharp flakes of snow that danced in the dim sunlight. Below the surface, hidden under layers of ice and centuries of snow, lay a chamber no human had touched for hundreds of years. It was perfectly sealed, its metal walls gleaming faintly through the ice, a relic from a time long forgotten. No one on Earth had known it existed, and yet it had not escaped the attention of the aliens. The alien vessel hovered silently above the frozen landscape, its sleek metallic body reflecting the pale sun. Inside, the crew moved with precise, careful motions, their long limbs and luminescent skin giving them an otherworldly grace. They had traveled far across the galaxy, curious about Earth and the creatures that once dominated its surface. Now their sensors had detected something extraordinary beneath the ice, and the excitement in their chamber was palpable. "This structure is ancient," said Lithar, the ship's lead scientist, his voice vibrating in the air with a tone of calm authority. "It was preserved almost perfectly. The energy readings are unlike anything we have recorded." His companions nodded, their eyes glowing faintly as they processed the data. They had seen many civilizations in their travels, many species frozen in time, waiting to be revived. But humans were considered fragile, primitive, and above all, predictable. The readings from this chamber were unusual, showing signs of life suspended in perfect stasis. Carefully, the aliens lowered their extraction pod to the icy surface. Mechanical arms descended, piercing the snow with incredible precision until they reached the chamber. The metal walls shuddered under their touch, then gave way as if recognizing the command of advanced beings. With a hiss and a shimmer of frost, the chamber opened, revealing a human inside. He lay perfectly still, preserved in a state that suggested he had been asleep for centuries. His features were calm, almost peaceful, and his body seemed untouched by time. The aliens observed him with clinical curiosity. This was what they expected, a human who would awaken confused, weak, and utterly dependent on their guidance. Lithar signaled the activation sequence. Energy flowed through the chamber, light filling the room as life slowly returned to the frozen human. Sensors tracked his vital signs, confirming that his body was responding perfectly to the revival process. The aliens' confidence grew. They had done this many times before with other species. Humans, however, were another matter. They assumed compliance. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the human's eyelids fluttered. He breathed in deeply, and his chest rose and fell with the rhythm of life. His eyes opened, and in that instant, the aliens realized he was looking at them, not with fear, but with careful attention. Every detail of the alien vessel, every movement, every sound, seemed to register in his mind immediately. The aliens exchanged subtle glances. Lithar, always composed, noted the human's reaction with mild interest. "He is conscious," he said. "Observation suggests normal cognitive function." The human sat up, stretching with the kind of ease that comes only from complete relaxation, as if he had simply awoken from a brief nap. He looked around the room, his gaze sharp and unhurried, taking in the technology that surrounded him. Panels of glowing controls, intricate machinery, and strange devices were all noted silently in his mind. One of the younger aliens stepped forward, extending a hand in a gesture they considered welcoming. "Do you understand us?" it asked in the universal translator's clear tone. The human tilted his head, studying the alien carefully. Then he spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I think so. Your language is unusual, but it makes sense." A murmur ran through the alien crew. This was unexpected. They had assumed the human would be overwhelmed, frightened, or at least slow to comprehend. Instead, he was calculating, observant, and confident. Lithar approached cautiously. "You have been asleep for centuries. We have revived you to learn about your species, to understand the humans that once walked this planet." The human nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand your curiosity, but I am not a simple subject. You should know that humans have a way of adapting that you may not anticipate." A flicker of surprise crossed the aliens' faces. They had studied humans, but this calm assurance was unusual. Most creatures, when revived after centuries, reacted with panic, confusion, or dependence. Not this human. He seemed already in control of himself, even in an alien environment. The human rose to his feet, moving with the grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. He stepped closer to the control panels, his fingers brushing lightly over the glowing surfaces. Instantly, the lights on one panel flickered, then corrected themselves, responding to his subtle touch. Lithar frowned. "Do you understand our technology?" he asked. The human nodded. "I do. It's complex, but it's not beyond observation. Patterns are clear once you look carefully." The aliens whispered among themselves, their luminescent skin shifting in color with excitement and uncertainty. They had never seen a human master something so quickly, even under observation. Humans were clever, yes, but this level of adaptability was different. As the human explored the chamber, he began to ask questions, not about himself, but about the ship, the crew, and their mission. He pointed out inconsistencies in their energy distribution, small inefficiencies that the aliens had overlooked. Each observation was made with casual precision, like someone walking through a familiar room and noting the position of furniture. One alien, clearly uneasy, stepped forward. "You were frozen for hundreds of years. How is it possible for you to understand so quickly?" The human smiled faintly. "Humans learn fast when we must. Time does not limit understanding, it only delays it. Now that I am awake, I can see clearly." The aliens tried to maintain composure, but a subtle tension filled the room. This was not what they had anticipated. They had assumed revival would bring confusion, weakness, or compliance. Instead, the human was calm, intelligent, and observant. He seemed entirely capable of mastering the alien technology before them. The human walked past the alien crew, touching another panel. With a quiet hum, a small malfunction corrected itself instantly. He paused, glanced over his shoulder, and said, "It is impressive, but there is room for improvement. Efficiency could be higher if systems were adjusted." Lithar's eyes widened slightly. "Are you suggesting improvements?" The human nodded. "Yes, small adjustments, nothing more, but these changes would make your operations smoother, faster, more reliable. I can show you if you wish." The aliens hesitated. Their mission was one of study, not collaboration. Yet the humans' confidence was contagious. Slowly, they realized they were witnessing a species that could think, adapt, and master problems in ways they had not predicted. As the hours passed, the human continued to examine the chamber, touching screens, observing machinery, and making notes in his mind. He asked questions about energy flow, resource allocation, and system redundancy. Each question revealed his deep understanding, not just of problem-solving, but of efficiency and logic. The alien crew began to feel a strange mixture of admiration and unease. Here was a creature they had thought fragile, predictable, and primitive, standing calmly in front of them, already proving that their assumptions had been wrong. Lithar stepped closer, his expression carefully neutral. "You are remarkable," he admitted. "I had expected a human to be less capable. Perhaps we underestimated your species." The human smiled faintly, not arrogantly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own worth. "Perhaps," he said, "but humans are always underestimated. It has always been our advantage." The alien crew looked at one another, realizing the truth in his words. They had come seeking answers, expecting obedience or simplicity. Instead, they had awakened a being whose intellect and awareness far exceeded their expectations. By the time the Arctic sun began to dip toward the horizon, the human had explored every corner of the chamber. He knew its strengths, its weaknesses, and its potential. He had not touched a weapon, engaged in any threat, or acted aggressively, yet his presence alone had altered the balance of power. The aliens, once confident in their control, now understood the enormity of their mistake. They had revived a human, assuming fragility and predictability. Instead, they had awakened curiosity, intelligence, and adaptability, all traits that made humans capable of surviving, thriving, and outsmarting challenges that even advanced civilizations struggled with. As the night fell over the icy landscape, the human stood at the center of the chamber, observing the alien crew with a calm, almost quiet authority. He had awakened from centuries of slumber, but already he understood more than they had expected. The aliens had come to study him, but in reality he was studying them. The human's eyes scanned the chamber once more, settling on the alien crew who had gathered in a tight cluster. Their luminescent skin glowed faintly, shifting colors as they whispered among themselves, communicating with a subtle vibration in the air that he could sense, even without understanding the exact language. He knew immediately that they were uneasy, that his calm and precision had disrupted their expectations. He stepped toward one of the larger panels, brushing his fingers lightly over the glowing surface. Numbers, graphs, and symbols shifted in response to his touch. Machines that had been unstable or inefficient began functioning smoothly, and the air itself seemed to hum with a quieter energy. The aliens observed with wide eyes, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. "You understand their systems almost immediately," Lithar said quietly to a colleague. "It is extraordinary. I have not seen anything like this before." The human turned, catching the subtle exchange. "You are correct," he said in measured tones. "Your systems are impressive, but they are not flawless. Every structure, every mechanism has patterns and weaknesses. Understanding them takes careful observation, and I have had time to observe while you assumed I was dormant." The alien scientists froze for a moment. There was no arrogance in the human's words, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth. Lithar studied him closely, noting the calm composure in his posture and the clarity in his eyes. This was not the reaction of a creature struggling to comprehend its surroundings. This was mastery, subtle yet unmistakable. One of the younger aliens, a slender figure whose skin shimmered with pale violet light, approached cautiously. "You were frozen for centuries," it said. "How is it possible that your mind works so clearly? Most species degrade in stasis." The human smiled faintly. "Humans are resilient. Our minds are shaped to adapt, to learn, to survive. Time cannot take that away. The more unexpected the challenge, the more we grow. I have slept long, but I have also observed long. Even in stasis, patterns of survival remain with us." The alien hesitated, unsure how to respond. They had considered humans fragile, primitive, and limited in their abilities. Every assumption they had held now seemed questionable. The human's calm intelligence radiated a quiet authority, unthreatening but undeniable. Lithar nodded slowly. "Your observations have merit. Perhaps we should allow you limited access to other sections of the vessel. You may offer insights that are useful." The human paused, thinking carefully. "I will need time," he said. "But yes, I can help. Your vessel is complex, but efficiency is universal. If systems work together properly, resources are saved, energy is conserved, and operations can improve. I can show you this if you wish." A murmur ran through the alien crew. Offering to improve their operations was unexpected. They had expected compliance, curiosity, perhaps fear, but not collaboration. Yet there was something in the human's demeanor that made them trust him, cautiously. Over the next hours, the human moved through the vessel, observing its inner workings. He watched how energy was distributed through the chambers, how information flowed between systems, and how the crew interacted with the controls. With careful gestures and quiet calculations, he began to make subtle adjustments. Machines that had been inconsistent now operated flawlessly. Lights that had flickered unpredictably stabilized. Even the air circulation shifted slightly, improving efficiency without altering the environment noticeably. The aliens watched in awe, their uncertainty growing. They had studied thousands of species across the galaxy, but none had demonstrated this level of comprehension so quickly. Even when faced with advanced technology, most creatures required years to adapt. This human had awakened, and within hours was already improving systems that had taken aliens decades to perfect. One of the aliens, clearly disturbed, asked, "Do you always work this fast? How can one being understand so much in such little time?" The human considered the question carefully. "Humans excel at observation and adaptation. We notice patterns others may miss. We find solutions where others see obstacles. Time does not limit understanding. It only measures how quickly others can follow. I have had all the time necessary to see the flaws in your systems." Lithar took a deep breath. "You are extraordinary, but there is more at stake here than efficiency. You have awakened at a moment when humans are unknown to us. Your kind is not in our records. We assumed weakness, but now I am uncertain." The human's eyes met Lithar's, calm and steady. "You should be. Humans have always been underestimated. It is not arrogance, it is fact. When we are understood fully, we are not just survivors. We are innovators, strategists, and problem solvers. You may have thought you could control me. Now you see that control was never an option." The alien crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting to study a species long extinct, to analyze, to manipulate, and perhaps to dominate. Instead, they had awakened a being who challenged their assumptions at every step. They had expected obedience. They had been given intelligence. Throughout the vessel, the human continued his assessments. He discovered redundancies, corrected minor inefficiencies, and suggested improvements to energy management that even the aliens had overlooked. With each adjustment, the aliens felt a mixture of awe and unease. Their creation, their observation, their control, all of it was quietly slipping from their grasp, replaced by the calm, precise mastery of a human mind. "You are not like any human we have studied in simulations," one of the senior crew members said, voice low and tinged with worry. "Simulation predicted curiosity, some adaptation, but nothing approaching this. How is this possible?" The human looked up from a complex control panel he was calibrating. "Simulations can never capture what humans are capable of. You see, understanding patterns is one thing, but applying them creatively is another. That is where humans excel. We do not just follow rules. We learn, we experiment, we adapt. You cannot simulate ingenuity." As the hours passed, the alien crew's unease grew. What had begun as curiosity was now mingled with a subtle fear, not of violence, but of being outpaced, outsmarted, and shown the limits of their own intelligence by a single human. The realization was both humbling and disconcerting. The human paused, stepping back to observe the crew. "You have been careful, I can see that. You assumed I would be slow, confused, or fearful. None of those assumptions are true. I am awake, aware, and capable. I do not seek conflict, but I do seek understanding. If you wish to learn, I can teach you about humans. If you wish to control, you will find it impossible." Lithar's expression was unreadable. He had faced many crises, many unexpected outcomes, but this was different. A human, thought to be long gone, was now challenging the foundation of everything the aliens had assumed about the species. He realized that their study had changed. They were no longer the observers. They were the observed, the learners, and perhaps the ones who would need to adjust. The human moved to another section of the vessel, observing an intricate series of conduits and energy flows. With quiet gestures, he redirected energy currents, smoothing inefficiencies that the aliens had considered minor. Lights that had flickered unpredictably stabilized, and machines that had been prone to occasional shutdowns now operated seamlessly. Every adjustment was subtle, almost imperceptible, but its effect was profound. The alien crew was silent, absorbing the magnitude of what they were witnessing. They had revived a human expecting weakness. Instead, they had awakened mastery. The human had not raised a weapon, had not shouted or demanded attention, yet his quiet competence filled the chamber with a sense of authority they could not ignore. Lithar stepped forward, his voice steady but thoughtful. "You have demonstrated remarkable intelligence and adaptability. Perhaps it is time to understand each other, rather than maintain this dynamic of observation." The human nodded. "Agreed. Understanding begins with observation and communication. Humans are always learning, always adapting. If you wish to coexist, that is what you must do as well. Respect patterns, anticipate change, and never assume weakness." The alien crew absorbed this advice, realizing that their initial assumptions had been flawed. They had assumed superiority, but now, the quiet, calm, and precise human before them had proven otherwise. They understood that intelligence, adaptability, and observation were strengths that no alien technology could fully contain or predict. As the Arctic sun dipped further, casting long shadows across the frozen landscape outside the vessel, the human stood at the center of the chamber. His gaze swept over the crew, steady and unwavering. He had been awakened centuries ago, but in these few hours he had already asserted a quiet authority. He had not fought, he had not shouted, he had simply been himself. And in doing so, he had changed the balance of power. The aliens had revived a human expecting a subject. Instead, they had awakened a teacher, a strategist, and a mind capable of seeing beyond their expectations. The realization settled over the crew like a silent wave. They had underestimated humanity. They had assumed weakness. And now they were beginning to understand that humans, even long frozen in time, were capable of far more than any simulation, prediction, or assumption could ever reveal. For the human, the chamber was no longer just a place of revival. It was a stage, a space to observe, to adapt, and to demonstrate the quiet power of his species. The aliens had opened a door they could never close, and they would never forget the lesson of this first encounter. And as the night fully embraced the Arctic landscape, the human took one last step toward the main console, his mind already calculating, planning, and understanding. He was awake, alert, and aware. The aliens had revived him, but they were beginning to realize that they had awakened something far greater than they had ever imagined. The human's gaze swept across the alien vessel, calm yet deliberate. Every light, every panel, every hum of machinery was noted, catalogued, and understood in his mind. He had spent hours observing, adjusting, and learning. Now it was time to move beyond simple understanding. The vessel's systems were vast, intricate, and interconnected, and he began to see patterns the aliens themselves had overlooked. He approached the energy conduits first. The flow of power between chambers was sufficient for basic operations, but he noticed subtle bottlenecks that could slow even the most advanced technology. With careful hands and quiet calculation, he adjusted the conduits, redirecting energy through a series of minor but precise calibrations. Machines that had occasionally faltered now operated flawlessly. Even the lighting system, previously inconsistent in brightness and hue, stabilized in perfect harmony. The aliens watched in silence. Lithar and his team had expected curiosity or simple experimentation, but this was something more. Every adjustment the human made was intentional, efficient, and purposeful. The vessel had been designed for maximum control by its alien operators, yet this single human seemed to wield it better than they ever had. One of the younger aliens, still struggling to hide its unease, whispered to a colleague, "He is not just observing, he is mastering it." The human heard the murmur, though he did not turn. "Correct," he said softly. "Observing is the first step. Mastery requires action." Without action, understanding remains incomplete. Humans excel because we act deliberately based on what we learn. Lithar stepped forward. "Your speed and precision are surprising. You correct inefficiencies almost immediately. How do you do this without prior knowledge of our systems?" The human tilted his head, considering the question carefully. "I do not need prior knowledge. Systems, no matter how complex, follow rules. Energy flows, information moves, and patterns emerge. Observation allows me to see these patterns. Once I see the patterns, I can act. That is all humans require." The aliens exchanged worried glances. They had anticipated challenges, of course, but nothing like this. They had expected revival to produce confusion, reliance, and perhaps fear. Instead, they had awakened a being whose calm intelligence, rapid understanding, and practical action were unmatched. Moving to the communication hub, the human began to observe how messages flowed between the crew and external contacts. He noticed delays in transmission, slight redundancies in processing, and inefficiencies in data routing. With a few subtle adjustments, the flow became smoother, faster, and more reliable. Signals that had occasionally lagged now reached their destinations almost instantly. A senior alien, his skin glowing faintly in shades of blue, spoke hesitantly. "You improve our operations with ease. You were frozen for centuries. Are humans always this capable?" The human paused, his gaze steady. "Not all humans, but humans as a species are adaptable. We notice, we learn, we apply knowledge quickly. Time in stasis has not diminished these abilities, it has only preserved them. Now that I am awake, I can observe and apply with clarity." Lithar's brow furrowed. "You are correct, but it is more than observation. You anticipate problems before they occur. That is troubling. We have considered every scenario in simulations. You predict outcomes we did not foresee." The human's lips curved slightly in a faint smile. "Prediction comes from understanding. Observation is not enough. Humans combine observation with logic, creativity, and experience. When patterns repeat, we anticipate them. When systems interact, we foresee outcomes. That is what makes humans formidable." The aliens were silent for a moment, processing his words. They had revived a human expecting compliance. Instead, they were faced with someone who could see, understand, and improve upon their technology in ways that challenged their assumptions. Their confidence in control was slowly being replaced by careful consideration of his capabilities. The human moved toward the navigation console. Its interface was complex, designed to be intuitive for the alien crew but foreign to any human. He studied it carefully, noting patterns in how it responded to input, how it displayed information, and how adjustments could enhance efficiency. With deliberate movements, he began to reorganize the data streams, aligning information more logically and effectively. "Are you reorganizing our systems?" one alien asked, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. The human nodded. "Yes, logic and structure improve efficiency. When data is organized clearly, decisions are faster, operations are smoother, and errors are reduced. You may have overlooked these improvements because you are accustomed to your methods. Humans notice the details others ignore." The aliens remained quiet, unable to argue. They had assumed superiority, but every action the human took demonstrated a different kind of dominance, intellectual mastery. It was subtle, quiet, and undeniable. He paused and looked at the alien crew. "Do not misunderstand," he said. "I do not act out of malice or arrogance. I seek understanding, improvement, and clarity. But when humans are underestimated, we adapt and excel. You have awakened me expecting weakness. You will find only competence, patience, and efficiency." One of the younger aliens shivered, though not from fear of physical threat. The human posed no danger of violence, yet the sense of imbalance, of power shifting in subtle ways, was undeniable. The realization that they had misjudged humans entirely filled them with unease. As the hours passed, the human continued his systematic review of the vessel. He checked environmental controls, recalibrated energy reserves, and optimized communication channels. He spoke quietly to the crew, explaining adjustments in simple terms, offering insights that were both practical and enlightening. Each suggestion was implemented immediately, producing visible improvements in efficiency and stability. The alien crew began to rely on his observations. Though initially hesitant, they realized that the vessel functioned better when he was involved. Systems that had occasionally faltered now operated flawlessly, and minor errors were corrected before they became noticeable. The human's quiet competence had become an indispensable presence. Lithar watched closely, noting the subtle changes in the crew's behavior. They were no longer in full control. Their assumptions about human weakness had been shattered. They were learning from the human, adapting to his methods, and in some ways following his lead. The human paused, stepping back from the consoles. "You see," he said calmly, "humans are capable of understanding complexity, predicting outcomes, and improving systems. We do not rely solely on strength or power. Our advantage lies in intellect, adaptability, and observation. You may have thought control was yours. Now you see that understanding is not about dominance, it is about insight." The aliens absorbed his words, realizing that every assumption they had made was flawed. They had treated humans as fragile, predictable, and limited. This human had proven that they were none of those things. Every adjustment, every observation, every insight had demonstrated the quiet, subtle power of intelligence and ingenuity. As the vessel glided through the Arctic sky, the human continued his work. He refined energy distribution, improved navigation logic, and optimized communication channels. He spoke to the crew when necessary, guiding them without command, teaching without arrogance. The aliens learned quickly that cooperation with a human was different from control. Guidance came not from force, but from clarity and insight. By the time the Arctic sun began to rise again, casting pale light across the icy landscape, the vessel operated more smoothly than ever. Every system, every process, every flow of energy had been touched by the human's understanding. He had not forced compliance, had not demanded attention, but his quiet mastery had reshaped the vessel's operations entirely. Lithar approached, his expression thoughtful. "You have exceeded every expectation. Humans are remarkable. I had thought revival would produce confusion, dependence, and fear. Instead, you have brought clarity, improvement, and insight. We underestimated you." The human looked at him steadily. "Underestimation is a mistake you will not repeat. Humans adapt. We observe, we improve. You can try to control, but control is meaningless against understanding. You have awakened me expecting weakness. That expectation has been corrected." A sense of quiet awe settled over the alien crew. They had not seen this coming. They had revived a human expecting to study, to observe, to control. Instead, they had awakened a being capable of outthinking them at every turn, improving their systems, and subtly shifting the balance of authority. The human's calm presence filled the chamber with an undeniable sense of command. Not through aggression, not through loud declarations, but through observation, logic, and quiet competence. The aliens had learned that intelligence, patience, and adaptability were powers that could surpass even advanced technology. As the vessel continued its journey over the frozen landscape, the human stepped back, surveying the crew and systems. He had not acted with malice, but his presence had changed everything. The aliens had expected a subject, but they had awakened a teacher. They had expected weakness, but they had found mastery. And as the Arctic wind whispered across the ice below, the human knew that his real work was just beginning. Observation had led to understanding, and understanding had already begun to shift the balance. The aliens had awakened him, but in doing so, they had awakened something far greater than they could have imagined. Every system was optimized, every inefficiency corrected, every error anticipated. The human had not only adapted to the alien vessel, he had made it an extension of his understanding. The realization settled over the alien crew like a quiet storm. They had underestimated humans for the first time, and the lesson would not be forgotten. Intelligence, insight, and adaptability were not weaknesses. They were the true power of humanity, and this single human had already proven it beyond doubt. The vessel glided silently over the Arctic ice, its sleek form cutting through the cold night like a shadow. Inside, the human moved calmly among the alien crew, observing them as they adjusted to the subtle changes he had introduced to the ship. Every panel, every screen, every control had been examined, understood, and improved. The aliens were no longer fully in control. They had become participants in the human's quiet mastery. He approached the central hub, where energy distribution and system coordination were managed. Previously, these systems had operated with efficiency suitable for alien standards, but he had noticed minor inconsistencies, redundancies that could be eliminated, and flows that could be optimized further. With careful hands and precise adjustments, he began to restructure the system, rerouting energy subtly, balancing consumption, and synchronizing operations. The vessel responded instantly. Lights became steadier, machines hummed smoothly, and minor faults vanished. The aliens watched, fascinated and uneasy. They had been confident in their control, their knowledge, and their design, but here was a human quietly improving everything they had built. One of the senior crew members, whose skin glowed in shades of emerald and gold, spoke hesitantly. "You have done what we thought impossible. How do you know all of this without prior instruction?" The human turned, his eyes calm and focused. Observation and reasoning. Patterns exist in all systems. Understanding those patterns allows prediction and improvement. Time in stasis has preserved my mind, and now that I am awake, I can apply what I see. Another alien, younger and less experienced, shivered, though not from fear of physical harm. "But we are advanced. Our simulations, our protocols, they are designed to prevent errors. How can one human surpass them?" The human smiled faintly. "Humans do not simply follow rules. We analyze, we learn, we adapt. Simulation can predict outcomes only based on assumptions. When assumptions are incomplete, predictions fail. Observation, logic, and adaptation allow humans to succeed where simulation cannot." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected control, they had expected compliance, and they had expected weakness. Instead, they were witnessing something they could not dominate or predict. Every subtle adjustment the human made reshaped their expectations and demonstrated a quiet authority. The human moved toward the vessel's navigation systems, where complex paths and calculations ensured safe travel over the icy landscape. He studied the displays carefully, noting how algorithms handled environmental variables, energy consumption, and routing priorities. With deliberate gestures, he adjusted the system, smoothing calculations and increasing efficiency. Routes that had once been slow or cautious now optimized energy usage without sacrificing safety. "You are improving navigation as well?" one alien asked, voice low and cautious. The human nodded. "Yes, patterns in movement and energy can be refined. Optimal paths save resources and reduce strain on systems. You built this vessel to function efficiently, but even efficiency can be improved when approached logically." The aliens remained silent, realizing the truth in his words. They had created advanced systems, but this human was demonstrating that intelligence and adaptability could surpass even their most careful designs. They had underestimated him, and now they were correcting their assumptions. He continued his survey of the vessel, moving to environmental controls. Temperature, air quality, and circulation were all within acceptable ranges, but he noticed small inefficiencies. By subtly adjusting flows and calibrations, he improved air distribution and stabilized temperature fluctuations. No one outside the chamber would notice the change, yet the effect was immediate and measurable. Lithar approached him, expression thoughtful. "You are doing more than observing. You are directing operations in ways that improve the vessel. Are you aware of the extent of control you now hold?" The human paused. "Control is a word you misunderstand. I do not dominate or command. I analyze, understand, and adjust. When systems are optimized, the natural outcome is improved performance. Authority is not necessary. Understanding is sufficient." The aliens processed this explanation carefully. They had assumed mastery came from rules, control, or force. Here was a being who demonstrated mastery without asserting dominance. The effect was subtle but undeniable. The balance of influence had shifted. The human moved to the communication hub, where messages flowed between the vessel and distant stations. He noted delays, redundancies, and occasional bottlenecks. With careful adjustments, he improved transmission speed, clarified data streams, and reduced unnecessary repetition. Signals that had once lagged now flowed smoothly, efficiently, and without error. "You are changing communication protocols without permission," one alien said quietly. The human's gaze remained calm. "I am improving them. Patterns of transmission were not fully optimized. Humans act where inefficiencies exist. Observation allows us to anticipate problems and correct them. This is not control, it is improvement." The alien crew fell silent, realizing that every action he took had practical benefits. The vessel operated more smoothly than it had in years. Systems that occasionally faltered now functioned flawlessly. Redundancies that had wasted energy were gone. Even subtle inconsistencies in light, temperature, and airflow were corrected. As the hours passed, the human continued his systematic adjustments. He spoke to the crew only when necessary, explaining each correction in simple, clear terms. Every suggestion was implemented immediately, producing visible improvements. The aliens, initially hesitant, began to rely on his insights. They recognized that collaboration with the human yielded better results than their own isolated efforts. Lithar observed quietly, noting the subtle shifts in crew behavior. They no longer fully controlled the vessel. They had become participants in the human's process, learning from him and following his guidance. The realization was profound. The aliens had awakened a human expecting compliance, and instead they were learning from him. The human moved to the observation deck, where the Arctic landscape stretched endlessly below. He studied the ice, the snow, and the horizon, noting patterns in wind currents and light reflection. These observations were minor compared to the vessel's systems, yet they demonstrated his attention to detail and ability to apply knowledge across domains. "You see everything," one alien whispered to a colleague. "He notices patterns we would miss." The human's voice was calm when he spoke again. "Observation allows understanding. Understanding allows improvement. Humans are trained to notice what others overlook, to learn from what is visible, and to act accordingly. That is why we succeed where prediction alone fails." The aliens listened, realizing the truth in his words. They had studied humans as a species, but had never anticipated the subtle mastery that observation and reasoning could provide. They had awakened one individual expecting weakness, and now they were faced with competence, clarity, and intelligence that surpassed their own expectations. He continued to move through the vessel, checking every system, every control, every data stream. Each adjustment was deliberate, subtle, and effective. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried clarity and purpose. The crew followed, learning from him rather than commanding him. They realized that the human had become the vessel's guiding mind, not through authority, but through insight. Lithar approached him once more, a mixture of admiration and unease in his expression. "You have transformed operations beyond anything we anticipated. You have improved efficiency, navigation, communication, and environmental controls. How much more can you do?" The human smiled faintly. "Humans are limited only by what they understand. There is always more to observe, more to learn, and more to improve." But the principle remains the same. Insight, adaptation, and careful action yield results. Control is unnecessary, understanding is sufficient. The aliens absorbed this carefully. They had assumed superiority, expecting a human to struggle, comply, or falter. Instead, they had awakened someone whose mastery of observation, reasoning, and subtle action had quietly shifted the balance of influence. Their assumptions were no longer valid. As the vessel continued its silent journey over the Arctic ice, the human moved from system to system, refining, adjusting, and optimizing. Every chamber, every control panel, every data flow bore the mark of his understanding. The aliens realized that they had not just awakened a human, they had awakened a being capable of leading without commanding, guiding without force, and mastering without authority. The realization was quiet but profound. Humans, underestimated for centuries, had a subtle strength that could surpass technology and expectation alike. They adapted, observed, and improved. They succeeded without aggression, relying on intelligence, insight, and ingenuity. By the time the Arctic sun began to rise again, casting a pale glow across the ice below, the vessel operated at its maximum potential. Every system functioned smoothly, efficiently, and harmoniously. The human stood at the center of the control room, calm and focused, surveying the crew and the vessel. He had not forced compliance, he had not demanded obedience, yet he had achieved mastery. The aliens had awakened a human expecting weakness, and instead they had awakened something far greater: clarity, competence, and subtle authority. And as the icy wind whispered across the frozen landscape, the human knew that his influence had grown. Observation had led to understanding, understanding had led to improvement, and improvement had shifted the balance quietly but unmistakably. The aliens had thought themselves in control. Now they realized that awakening a human had awakened a force that could not be predicted, contained, or controlled. Insight, adaptability, and subtle mastery were human strengths, and the human before them had already demonstrated them in full. The vessel moved silently over the Arctic ice, carrying the human and the alien crew into the unknown. The journey was far from over, but one truth had become clear: humans were not to be underestimated. They did not rely on aggression or authority. They relied on observation, intelligence, and the quiet power of understanding. And this single human had already proven that the aliens' assumptions had been wrong. Every system optimized, every inefficiency corrected, every subtle flaw addressed. He had turned the aliens' confidence into careful respect. The lesson had been learned without confrontation, without threat, and without noise. The Arctic sky deepened into night, stars reflecting off the ice below. Inside the vessel, the human stood quietly, surveying his surroundings, calm and unhurried. The aliens had revived him, expecting a subject. Instead, they had awakened a mind capable of subtle dominance, careful guidance, and unparalleled understanding. And as the ship continued its journey, carrying its passengers over the frozen world below, the human understood one thing clearly: the real test of his abilities was only beginning. The human stood at the center of the vessel, calm and composed, watching the alien crew move through their stations. Every system he had touched now functioned flawlessly, every inefficiency corrected, and every process optimized beyond the aliens' expectations. The vessel itself seemed almost alive, responding to his subtle adjustments, and the crew had begun to rely on his guidance more than their own instincts. Despite their initial hesitation, the aliens had learned to trust his insights. They no longer attempted to control him. Instead, they observed and followed, adapting to the human's quiet mastery. There was no fear in his presence, yet an undeniable authority emanated from him, a sense that intelligence, observation, and understanding could surpass any technology or protocol. Lithar approached, his luminescent skin dimming slightly with a mixture of awe and humility. "You have transformed this vessel completely. Every system, every operation, every detail, more efficient than we believed possible. You have done this without force, without authority, without even asking. How is it that a human can achieve so much?" The human tilted his head, his gaze steady. "Humans succeed because we observe, learn, and adapt. We do not rely on power, weapons, or dominance. We rely on understanding. When we are underestimated, we see patterns others miss. We find solutions where others see obstacles. That is why humans are resilient, and why we can excel even in unfamiliar environments." The aliens were silent, absorbing his words. They had come expecting to study, expecting to control, expecting simplicity. Instead, they had been confronted by competence, precision, and insight. They realized that humans were not fragile, predictable, or limited. They were adaptable, clever, and capable of mastering complexity in ways that even advanced technology struggled to anticipate. The human moved through the vessel, observing the crew at their stations. He watched how they communicated, how they coordinated tasks, and how they relied on the systems he had optimized. Each adjustment he had made now influenced every operation, every calculation, every decision. The vessel was no longer merely a machine. It was a reflection of his understanding, a network of efficiency and harmony. "You have created balance," one of the younger aliens whispered, voice tinged with wonder. "Without demanding control, without giving orders, everything works better than before." The human nodded. "Improvement does not require domination. Systems respond to observation, guidance, and clarity. When humans act with understanding, the results speak for themselves. Authority is not necessary. Competence and insight are sufficient." The alien crew absorbed the lesson quietly. They had awakened a human expecting weakness and submission. Instead, they had found mastery, subtle guidance, and intelligence that reshaped their perception of humanity. Every panel, every screen, every data stream now reflected his touch, his understanding, his quiet control. Lithar, observing this, realized the full significance. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "Not through force, but through insight. Humans, we have underestimated your species for centuries." The human's gaze was calm, yet penetrating. "Underestimation is common, but it is always a mistake. Humans succeed when others overlook our abilities. We do not need weapons to prove strength. Our power lies in observation, reasoning, and adaptation. When we are awake and aware, even the most advanced beings must recognize our skill." The vessel moved silently over the frozen Arctic landscape, and the human continued to refine operations. Minor delays in communication were corrected, energy distribution optimized further, and environmental systems balanced perfectly. Every adjustment was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet its effect was undeniable. The aliens could feel the difference, though they could not fully explain it. "You are improving even beyond what we thought possible," a senior crew member said, awe in his tone. "It is not just observation, it is innovation, insight, and understanding." The human smiled faintly. "Yes, observation alone is not enough. Understanding allows prediction, prediction allows action, action allows improvement. This is how humans excel. You have awakened me expecting weakness, and instead, you have witnessed competence, clarity, and capability." The crew worked in quiet cooperation, guided by his insights rather than orders. They had learned to anticipate his adjustments, to follow his subtle recommendations, and to value the calm authority of his presence. The human's mastery was not loud or forceful, but it was undeniable. Systems that had once struggled now functioned seamlessly. Operations that had once faltered now ran perfectly. The vessel as a whole was transformed. Lithar watched him closely. "Your abilities are extraordinary," he admitted. "You have demonstrated not just intelligence, but foresight, adaptability, and subtle guidance. Humans are unlike any species we have studied. I see now why your kind has thrived despite challenges we cannot predict." The human nodded. "Humans adapt, we learn, we improve. We do not rely on strength or technology alone. Our advantage is understanding, observation, and application. You will find that this is true in any environment, no matter how unfamiliar." The aliens listened, humbled and intrigued. They had studied countless civilizations, observed innumerable species, and encountered advanced technology, yet nothing had prepared them for the quiet mastery of a single human. He had not threatened them. He had not demanded obedience. He had simply observed, understood, and improved. Yet in doing so, he had demonstrated a subtle authority that no machine, protocol, or prediction could match. As the vessel continued over the Arctic ice, the human paused to consider the environment outside. He noted the patterns of snow and ice, the shifting light of the rising sun, and the subtle currents of air above the frozen landscape. Even in areas beyond the vessel, he observed with the same clarity, noting the beauty, patterns, and structure of the world. "You notice everything," one of the younger aliens whispered to a colleague. "Not just systems, but patterns, behavior, and potential. He sees more than we can, even with our technology." The human spoke without turning. "Observation allows understanding. Understanding allows prediction. Prediction allows improvement. Humans succeed because we combine all three. You awaken me expecting simplicity, and instead you are learning the power of insight. The aliens absorbed the meaning, realizing that their assumptions about humans had been wrong. They had expected weakness, confusion, and reliance. Instead, they were confronted by intelligence, calm competence, and subtle guidance. Every system now reflected his understanding, and every member of the crew had been influenced by his quiet authority. Lithar approached him, speaking carefully. "You have done more than we anticipated. Every system, every operation, every calculation, you have improved beyond expectation. Humans, you are remarkable. We underestimated your potential." The human's expression was steady. "Underestimation is common. Humans thrive because others fail to predict our abilities. Strength is not in aggression, but in observation, understanding, and adaptation. You have awakened me expecting weakness, and instead, you have witnessed capability, clarity, and ingenuity." The aliens nodded quietly, understanding the truth of his words. They had come to study, to observe, and perhaps to control. Instead, they had awakened a human capable of guiding, improving, and subtly influencing operations without force or threat. Their perspective had changed, and their assumptions had been corrected. Throughout the vessel, the human continued his work. Minor inefficiencies were corrected, energy was optimized, and communication flows were smoothed further. Environmental controls were balanced perfectly, creating a stable and harmonious atmosphere. Every adjustment was subtle yet effective, demonstrating that intelligence and observation could surpass technology alone. "You are teaching us without instruction," one alien whispered. "Without command, without demand, he has reshaped everything." The human nodded. "Humans lead not through dominance, but through understanding. Observation, insight, and adaptation are our strengths. You have awakened me expecting weakness, and instead, you are learning the value of competence." The vessel continued its silent journey over the Arctic ice, and the aliens had come to recognize the truth. Humans were not to be underestimated. They did not rely on aggression or force. Their power lay in observation, reasoning, and subtle mastery. The human before them had demonstrated this fully, transforming their perception of his species in hours. As the Arctic sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the ice, the human stepped back and observed the crew. He had not forced obedience, demanded attention, or acted with aggression. Yet he had achieved mastery over operations, guidance over decisions, and subtle influence over outcomes. The aliens had awakened him expecting a subject, but they had found a mind capable of teaching, improving, and inspiring respect. Lithar spoke finally, his tone quiet and thoughtful. "You have proven that humans are unlike any species we have encountered. Intelligence, insight, adaptability, your abilities surpass expectation. We came to study, but we are learning from you. This is a lesson we will not forget." The human smiled faintly, calm and composed. "Then the lesson is clear. Humans succeed not because of dominance or aggression, but because we observe, understand, and adapt. You awaken me expecting weakness. You will now carry the knowledge of human capability forward. That is the true power of our species." The aliens absorbed the words in silence, humbled by what they had witnessed. They had assumed superiority, expecting compliance. Instead, they had learned a fundamental truth. Humans thrived through intelligence, observation, and subtle mastery. The single human they had revived had transformed their perception, demonstrating that true strength lay not in force, but in clarity, insight, and careful action. The vessel moved silently over the ice, carrying its passengers into the unknown. The human stood calmly at the center, watching, observing, and understanding. He had awakened to a new world, yet he had already left a mark on it through subtle guidance and mastery. The aliens had come expecting control, but they had encountered competence, patience, and intelligence that could not be contained or predicted. As the Arctic landscape stretched endlessly below, the human understood one thing clearly. Humanity's power was not in dominance, weapons, or strength. It was in observation, insight, and the ability to adapt and improve. He had awakened centuries later to prove that fact, and in doing so, he had changed the aliens' understanding of his species forever. And as the stars reflected off the frozen landscape and the vessel glided forward, the human remained calm, precise, and fully aware. The aliens had revived him, expecting a subject. Instead, they had awakened a teacher, a master of observation and subtle influence, and a reminder that humans, even centuries removed from their world, could excel beyond expectation in any environment.